I was speaking with James Corbett, our next speaker, our final speaker of the night, and I asked him to tell me about himself and describe himself to me, and he says, I was a kid from Queens with a 5th grade education who becomes a bioethicist and wants to change the world. It's a good start. That's good. Minus the nunchucks, he's doing really, really, really great. He also tells me he's a Mets fan, right? So, I'm thinking Mets fan, diabetes epidemic. He just basically is in constant crisis, basically, and enjoys it, I think. Sorry, did I not mention I'm a Yankees fan? I forgot. I left that part out. But he's also been, along the way, a fellow at Harvard Medical School and at Harvard Safra Center for Ethics. He has worked in a variety of healthcare environments. And I look forward to how he challenges us to rise to meet the urgent demands of this epidemic. James Corbett, everyone.
Thank you. So many years ago, I worked in a hospital on the East Coast, and a patient walked into our ER. That patient was exhibiting erratic behavior. Yet we chose to discharge that patient from our ER, and that patient walked in front of a train. I often think about my role in that patient's demise. You see, I was in charge of our psych units across our system, and I was charged with increasing revenue and decreasing costs. And this patient was uninsured, so we chose not to admit him. I've come to think about that time in my life and that experience as a conflict of obligation. Not a conflict of interest, but a conflict of obligation. The obligation we had, and I had, in my corporate identity, and the obligation I had as a person of God, as a dad, as a husband. I would argue we all experience similar conflicts of obligation in our roles, and that if we take this challenge on seriously, we will experience more conflicts of obligation as we come up against our corporate roles and the charge that this gathering has for us to take on. My name is James Corbett. I'm happy to be in front of you today. I am a Mets fan, I am from Queens, and I am a odd duck of sorts. I have both a law degree and a Master of Divinity. And whenever I tell people that, they kind of look at me the way you're looking at me. They inevitably chuckle. And then the next question I get is, what'd you do first? As if they could peer into my soul. So for the record, I went to law school first and then divinity school. And I'll leave it to you to decide if I've been ruined or reformed. So lightning round, I'm going to go quick. I'm a New Yorker. I talk fast. Why am I starting with something about opioids and substance abuse when we're here to talk about diabetes and chronic disease? Because I think there's lessons there for us. I believe that our population will be known as the opioid generation. I think that we will be looked at, and history has its eyes on us, and they'll say, what did you do? How did you let it happen? Right now, 115 people die a day from the opioid crisis. In fact, this time next week, I'll be in Dayton, Ohio with representatives from Google and Alexandria Real Estate Equities, where they decided to dump a large amount of money into Dayton, Ohio to address this issue. Corporations can step up if properly challenged under the premise of corporate social responsibility or enlightened self-interest. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to take the learnings from what's happening in opioid and bring them to diabetes. In a similar vein, many of us know that the AIDS epidemic helped to inform public health. So let's take those lessons. One of the biggest lessons we can take is to realize that we have to get beyond this notion of shame when we think of diabetes. This book talks about shame and the punitive nature of shame and how it impacts us, much to the chagrin of the patients we serve. I'm going to speak a couple of things, a little bit about the sugar-sweetened beverage program I had in place in Boston, Massachusetts, about 6 years ago now, and then I'll talk about food as medicine, and then I'll wrap it up in true lightning format. So 6 years ago, Boston had a great program where they asked all the hospitals to come together. They said, if we're going to address sugar-sweetened beverages and hopefully impact diabetes, unlikely we'll be able to get a tax at that time. Happy to say that we are moving in that direction now. But they decided to fund hospitals in order to reduce sugar-sweetened beverages. So they brought us all together, some of the best hospitals in the country, Mass General and others. And I was at the time representing 6 hospitals in Boston. And they said, will you guys, if we fund you, help us to address sugar-sweetened beverages? Will you stop selling them in your cafeterias in order to impact the issue? And I can tell you that it went over like a lead balloon. People looked at them and said, why would we do that? They're going to go across the street. And oh, by the way, do you know how much money we make on sugar-sweetened beverages? But I was crazy enough to take it on. I like a challenge. I like a good fight. And we actually had great success, so much so that we shamed the other hospitals for taking it on similarly. So let's talk about the story. So there was really, and I'll go through quickly this, and I'll give the slides to everyone. Red, green, yellow. We came up with this campaign to show the importance of thinking about sugar-sweetened beverages under the framework of red, green, and yellow, and intuitive, stop. The middle was those artificially flavored beverages. And we had some great outcomes in 6 hospitals in Massachusetts for a for-profit health system. And the for-profit owners were, kind of let me do this, but they made it clear this wasn't my job. My job was to bring revenue somehow to the institution, and that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it on my own. To make a long story short, it's a very complicated issue. At Kearney Hospital, the CEO was a former FQHC president, Bill Walczak, and he said, I'm going to take this on. He banned it. And he got a lot of flack, as did the frontline staff, who were the register keepers, who people were yelling at, like, I want my sugar-sweetened beverages. So when you do these programs in place, you have to think about what it means for those on the front lines who often are going to be experiencing the negativity of our great beliefs and theories. At St. Elizabeth's Hospital, we were able to reduce sugar-sweetened beverages by 54%. You'll notice that in some of these areas, the yellow beverages, with, the artificially flavored ones, which are not good for you, for your cardiovascular health, went up. And it's complicated. And why I think this is a great story is that, it's not easy when you're doing this type of work. And the culture will eat your strategy, so it's important to think that it's going to be messy and complicated, but keep the fight and focus on it in a way that can have great outcomes. When I think of food as medicine, there are a myriad of efforts and things that are happening. In a similar way, at the same hospital, I was able to get us to deliver healthy, low-sodium foods to patients that were at risk of readmission. The powers that be recognized that if we're going to get penalized, maybe it's okay to spend money on something like that. We also did prescription farmers markets at that same institution. But in the midst of the work that I was doing for both sugar-sweetened beverage reduction and farmers market vouchers, the hospitals were in the midst of opening a Dunkin' Donuts at that same hospital. John Buford talks about the 10-year battle he had to get a McDonald's out of his hospital. So it's one step ahead and one step back. I will say I learned valuable lessons in working with the distributors, because we all know we're in the era of supply chain management in these hospitals, and the cost of savings potentially is very high. And they didn't want any parts of sugar-sweetened beverages, reduction. They thought they were making a lot of money. They were convinced subsequently that they could take this on, and they realized they would make money on selling the water, because what I did was I took the price of Cokes and sugar-sweetened beverages and I increased it. I doubled the price on that, basically an internal tax. I used that to subsidize the price of water. So the price of water was $1. The price of sugar-sweetened beverages was like $3. We put the water eye level. We put the sugar-sweetened beverages on the ground level. So bend over and pay $3 for a Coke or take the water from the freight level. So we reversed what's happening now in grocery stores with unhealthy foods, and we're able to win with that narrative. I'm going to close by saying that the importance of words and rethinking narratives cannot be overstated. There's a gentleman, Frank Luntz, who's a political theorist. He uses words in important ways. Instead of global warming, he uses climate change. Nobody wants to be warmed, but climate change, it happens every season anyway, right? He took the words of estate tax, benign, and turned it into death tax, and it got people upset and angry. Who wants to be taxed on their death? Think about that. So in the ways they use those words, I would argue that the emotion of disgust is what he was seeking to drive. So if you watch a certain political channel, you might be disgusted by the welfare mom who's taking advantage of the system. If you watch another political channel, you might be disgusted by the billionaire who's spending money. So what I say for this group is, let's leverage that emotion of disgust, and let's leverage it for goodwill. Let's leverage it to address the diabetes challenge. Let's be disgusted that if you have diabetes and you're on commercial insurance, you can get continuous glucose monitoring to impact that issue. But if you're on Medicaid, fuck you, you're not getting continuous glucose monitoring. You take what you get, you deal with the pricks. In the same vein, if you have substance abuse and you have Suboxone, as we all know, blocks the inhibitors and prevents you from getting high. Right now, if you're on commercial insurance, you can get a 30-day shot, slow release. It'll block your inhibitor. It'll ensure that you don't get high and that you get off opioids. But if you're on Medicaid, fuck you, they're not paying it. I'm saying that word to be provocative because I think that's what we're saying to the poorest of the poor. And the morality of a society, I believe, is defined by its treatment of the poor and the underserved. So let's be disgusted about the way we treat diabetes in this country. Let's be disgusted about the current circumstance, and let's rally that notion of disgust to transform the system. Godspeed.